Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And as I've been just sort of drifting around in this spiritual milieu for the last 12 years, it's so revelatory to come across incredible artists and people that have sort of stretched across different paradigms of the entertainment strata. And what I mean by that is, they maybe did some records as a musician. They might have written poetry, done documentary work, and published books as well. And I got a chance today to speak to somebody who really came up at a time when, the urban centers in this country were driving social consciousness through a lot of art and creation. Not everything was perfect by any means, but it was before white flight. And it had a huge impact on my guest. Decorated documentary filmmaker. She's also an amazing author. I happened to stumble into a record store here in Tucson and just digging around, really wasn't planning on buying anything, and I just found this incredible record called House of Pain. I was like, I've never seen this, and it had a bunch of accompanists, some of my dearest friends in the world, like Randy Brecker, who played on it. So I was like, wow, where is this cat? And sure enough, she was completely accessible online, and now I get a chance to break it down with her. Sarah Kernochan, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, and thank you for rescuing my record from the bin.
It was rescued. It's got a lot of snap, crackle, and pop, but I got to tell you, it's haunting, and in some ways holds up better today than maybe even it did then, although I wasn't even around at that time. And I just wanted you to talk, if you could, sort of give the audience a visual depiction of, New York City, especially when you first became conscious of it as a young girl, because when I talked to a lot of the cats, especially guys that kind of moved into the city in the early 70s, or they moved up from places like Miami, they were stunned because, well, number one, it was very drab. It was not an elitist kind of place. It was a kind of a gray color. People like Thelonious Monk would just be randomly playing jazz clubs, like amidst the masses. But really, what's fascinating to me on a socioeconomic level is just the idea that so many of the apartments, the downstairs floor was commercial, and then above that, it was residential. So there was just a communal feel, and it wasn't perfect. Obviously, there were rough parts of town and stuff, but I just wanted you, to me, today, New York is just so McDonaldized, and so much of the spirit has moved to Brooklyn, thankfully. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your perceptions of New York when it started to come into realization for you.
Oh, that's a difficult question, because as much as time as I spent in New York back then, I was also always running away from it. My first exposure was, I was a college student at Sarah Lawrence, and I joined a poetry workshop, or a writer's workshop at St. Mark's Place in a church. And that was my first contact with the kind of underground writer scene that was just starting to show up in the pages of the Village Voice. I dropped out of college because those writers that I met inspired me to want to become a writer right away and then start to live life rather than writing about college, which didn't interest me. So I dropped out of college and got a job at the Village Voice, actually. New York then was extremely dirty, hard to breathe.
Interesting. Just stop right there. So you're telling me there was a lot of pollution.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it took them a while to clean up their act where that was concerned. But
Right.
I do remember crossing the street and having, trucks with black smoke just, barfing smoke in my face. And that I would try to hold my breath when I crossed the street always. And I could get onto a side street where those trucks weren't. And the cars as well. But, we're talking about the late 60s here. So, really the push to improve the quality of life in this city had not begun yet. although we had a very, kind of genteel, suave mayor who seemed to live in a bubble quite above the rest, the sort of Upper East Side life. So I don't think he was quite aware that nearly all the neighborhoods surrounding his place of residence were filthy. And
fascinating.
But it was always vibrant. The cultural life was always there, and I think it as long, way back into Hamilton's time, it was always a place to get excited and start talking about stuff. So, that much hadn't changed, and that's what drew me to New York, and still does. But at the same time, I really don't like it here. And I didn't back then either, having come from the country.
Your pops was the law professor at Columbia?
Yes, he and my mother both commuted into the city from Connecticut.
Interesting. So wait, so that's fat. So they were taking Metro North into the city every day?
She drove because she was handicapped to the United Nations most days as a consultant for UNESCO, and he took the train. Yes.
Okay, so it wasn't, you guys weren't Upper West Side cats. I mean, you were in New England or Connecticut. What was the first time you actually resided in Gotham was at college?
It was in technically the Bronx, in Yonkers. So kind of part of New York, but not really. There are some very nice kind of suburbs of the city out there, but technically they're all part of the Bronx. It was a 20-minute train ride into New York.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, we just lost this incredible, he just passed away. He was an amazing bass player. He also played, acted and directed the mime troupe, which was a theatrical sort of unit out in the Bay Area. Is a guy named Bruce Barthol, and he was, I'm always fascinated with like the influence that the beat writers specifically had on vocabulary in music itself. A lot of people give them credit for writing about this language of music called bebop, and I'm not saying that that's your wheelhouse by any means, but I was wondering if you could talk about how, not just how the writers inspired you, but how, if in fact those writers were writing, what were they writing about that was stimulating to you? Because I know that, this came after Kerouac and Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti. Those guys were already established by the late 60s.
Right. No, I loved Ginsberg. I didn't read a lot of poetry, though. I was not influenced by the beats. My favorite writers were Faulkner, and Thomas Pynchon C was a biggie for me.
Wow.
Catch-22. And I like I like the writers of a slightly earlier era who were writing in sort of a surreal fashion. I was all about pushing the language and trying to express something in a way that nobody had ever done before, with that sort of arrogance of youth. So my early writing was fairly incomprehensible.
I dig. No. I think this is
music and image,
yeah.
Which inevitably led to music, which was a much better place to put it.
A less pretentious place where people were you being judged in the writing community because of the surrealism and progressive writing that you were doing?
Well, more impressionistic. It was more natural to the kinds of songs that were being written there. Once we got out of the folk era and into the Dylan era, then language became a lot more scrambled. And the kinds of writers I was referring to who were of the surreal kind, some of them just used to take pages of words and cut them all up and rearrange them in a random order, and that was their writing. So a lot of experimentation was going on, and in music, once Dylan kind of went into the surreal, which he did after, he went electric pretty much. that gave license to songwriters to not necessarily imitate him, but to loosen up, and introduce, making connections that didn't necessarily make sense until, like poetry, you read them again and again and again, or listened again and again.
You give an example of, like, I've tried to document this time. It was kind of cosmic because just maybe a month ago I was in New England and wound up at Al Cooper's house in Somerville, and we were.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really cosmic. I mean, I've done a couple interviews with him. He's 80 years old, still rocking out, and but what was I always like? Can you talk about when Dylan plugged in? He was the one that was. It was only Dylan that was vilified by the more purist folk fans out there. I mean, a lot of the black blues players, they always plugged in. When you said something to the effect that when Dylan plugged in, things got very surreal, and people lightened up. Can you give like an example of what you mean by that?
About what Dylan did?
Well, I mean, what was the
turning point?
Yeah, I mean, even for
are you asking for an example of a song or?
Yeah, well, no. So I mean, what I've documented is that, like, the Forest Hills Queens gig, playing on those tennis courts. It was an eerie night, and it was Harvey Brooks, and it was Robbie Robertson and Cooper, and that was and those guys, to a man, they said it was a very mixed response, but he was the one that where it was like this division between the folk purists and the more progressive music people. So I guess like, aside from just plugging in, yeah, I mean, how did that create this sort of permission for people to loosen up in all different forms of art?
Well, the song that came about, and here we go into Al Cooper, was like a rolling stone.
Right.
I mean, that just washed over you like a maverick wave. And I think part of the hue and cry was that a lot of music people, musicians, critics, were being put out of business kind of the minute he turned on that amplifier and did that fierce song. They knew their days were numbered.
Wow.
That was the end of folk. And game over. Pretty much. I mean,
that's so interesting.
Continued, because of the Vietnam War, but the sort of genteel playing of songs from the past, or that told, stories more or less cogently. All of that ended. And everybody wanted that driving beat. The Beatles were also introducing a lot of surreal lyrics. That was the time of Sgt. Pepper, when you had A Day in the Life, which was also seminal, really. So, I'm not a historian or anything like that, but as far as my own influences, I would say Randy Newman and the Beatles, who, Randy Newman was fairly straightforward in terms of imagery, but the Beatles were really, you know what? It was probably the acid.
Yeah, well, that was where I was going. I mean,
yeah,
everything. It was like,
it was the LSD.
I'm curious if you could talk about, because I've written a whole book on my interviews with the remaining merry pranksters. Obviously, I never got to Kesey, but it was just the Beats, and then the pranksters fell between the Beats and the hippies. But man, what was going on at the Longshoremen's Hall in San Francisco with the acid tests, and then up and down the coast, I have to believe there was a ripple effect going on the East Coast. In fact, I know there was, but were you ensconced in psychedelics? Can you talk about really just sort of breaking open and becoming completely vulnerable to the moment in terms of artistic creation? I mean, for me at 44, I keep wanting to say 43, but 44, I mean, acid was not always pretty for me, but I do know that fundamentally it put me into the intergalactic, and therefore I now can just be a little bit fearless. And I just wanted to know the impact that it had on you. Clearly, things were being made at a very pure level in the mid 60s before it eventually became illegal.
Oh, tell me about it.
Bathtubs of acid, it was just unbelievable, but it was very pure. Do you want to talk about Sarah Kay pre-LSD and then post-LSD?
Let's see. Pre-LSD would have been, my first acid trip was 68. That was it. But by then it was so prevalent.
Well, talk about your first trip. Was it in the rural country, or it wasn't in the Bronx? God, I hope not.
Oh, no. I had learned from smoking dope that it's really best to put yourself in a pretty place.
It's true.
And my college campus was attractive, but it began in somebody's bedroom, frankly. We had taken what we thought was mescaline, and when it didn't take effect after about 45 minutes, my partner said, I guess this is weaker than I thought. Let's
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Did.
Yep.
And then, yeah. And then time passed with my eyes closed, and I was at the point of rushing around in the sky like a superhero. I mean, the motion was in my entire psyche, the motion of flying. And I felt a tap on my shoulder, and my companion said, "This is acid we took, not mescaline." He didn't know. And I couldn't remember what that meant. I couldn't remember what the word meant, except that it sounded scary. So I opened my eyes, and everything in the room was writhing. It was very frightening. But he was very experienced. He used to take acid every weekend. So he was able to talk me through it. And where I ended up once I shed my name, my identity, and pretty much everything that that had previously defined me, once that fell away and I was in a pure state of being, that was something that changed my life. I never basically came down from that.
Really? But this was, you're talking about it in a positive fashion.
Yeah.
You definitely didn't wind up in your basement for the rest of your life. But it really never, you were fundamentally changed your psyche was changed forever.
Yes. I knew what it felt like to simply be, and I guess I'm not bragging. It felt like enlightenment,
Sure.
I was in the light, and I was inside the love, which, the Beatles obviously were very experienced with acid as well. That's something that they felt as well, which is how you get songs like All You Need Is Love.
And they were also like
throwing. It seemed to be that every need was met in this white place.
It's very well articulated. Would you say that at a certain point did that? I'm looking here at House of Pain, which is just. It's a haunting album. It's haunting, and
thank
you. And kind of progressive. I just wonder.
Well, I had a music upbringing that meant that I was never going to be writing in the four chord.
Thank God. Thank
God.
Yeah, thank God.
There were much more interesting things.
It was more angular, right? It was just. Can you talk about how your? You mentioned me off air that you're not like I'm not really a musician, but at this point in chronologically in your life, would you say that that psychedelic experience sort of catapulted you into creating your first records?
I don't know about that.
Because I mean, part of this album, even though it's not like jammed out and really like instrumentally improvisational, it is psychedelic.
Really?
Like I would say like
What
it's.
song are you thinking of?
Well, no, because you know what I'm talking about is like some of the messages remind me of when I opened my eyes and everything was writhing in the room. That was scary. I wouldn't. The album is scary to me, and I have to. You know, it feels a little bit. I mean, I just don't know how much of it is a direct correlation to your own life experiences.
Well, the cover is scary. I'll give you that. And the music video I made for it is.
There's a music video?
Is discomforting. Yeah, it's online. Yeah, it was an early one. I mean, there were no such thing as music.
Oh, absolutely. That's way ahead of time.
I was a filmmaker, so I used my advance to make a video that was part horror movie, part animation, and part performance, which you could definitely say was psychedelic. But my idea was that since I didn't want to perform, because I wasn't good enough and I didn't have a band, that RCA could simply run this video in record stores and it would probably sell the record. And they thought it was crazy. I offered it to them for free. I said, you have this new video equipment, this home video stuff that everybody's going to buy. So take that equipment and put it in a record store. People will probably watch it. It's only, a 3-minute film. So they didn't take me up on it. So I do consider myself to be sort of predictive in that way. But you're asking about LSD and its influence on my music, and I really don't know what to tell you.
That's cool. No, I mean, I'm looking here. Yeah.
My second album does have something like that. A long cut called Room Service that has a 20-piece string orchestra on it, and I was able to get quite psychedelic with that.
The tune there's a couple on this side, the second side here. One of them is the tune that got me was Easy Girl. And that is, Papa locked me in a room before he went out drinking. I thought I'd go mad. I had that hungry, sinking feeling, broke out the window, got to meet a man. Pa will beat me. I won't feel it. I mean, it just goes on, and that's just one of the songs. So, I mean, can you talk where, I guess not specifically that tune per se, but can you talk about where the germs for some of your songs came from? Was it direct application, or was this just sort of stuff that was in the ether?
Well, I am a fiction writer, and always was.
Yeah.
So that was just a story that came to me when I was, writing the music. It seemed to be start high and then go deep was what the actual music was doing. It was descending into a more primal place, and that was the story I built around it. In the way that one invents stories to write short stories or novels or whatever. I don't, in a more spiritual sense, where did it come from? I'm pretty used to just opening the channel and letting anything come through. As far as I'm concerned, it's already all out there. It's just a matter of, opening the flue, FLUE, to let it in. And, that's pretty much the way I write, except when I'm trying to earn money.
Well, no, I'm going to go back. Wait, so you
on assignment, you don't get to go there.
Absolutely. No, the one reason I love doing the Jake Feinberg show is just full creative control, and I feel like you're about that as well. But chances are, if you got a gig and somebody's paying you, you lose a little. You're a little bit more restricted. But can you talk about getting out of how you learned it before? It sounds like to me that you were a vessel or an open channel, did you learn how to get out of your own way and become a conduit for information coming through you early in your life? Can you talk about a definitive moment of when you were literally channeling information coming through you from the outer sources?
Yeah, it actually happened in 1974, which was the year that my album came out. It wasn't the year when I wrote the songs. But I started to, I had some experiences with a ghost in my parents' house where I was living because I'd broken up with my boyfriend. And I was put in a room, because mine had been turned into my father's study. I was put in a room that I never slept in before, at the top of the house. And some very strange noises and experiences, between waking and sleeping started to happen, and I was getting freaked out about it. So I went to a psychic. I didn't tell him anything, but out of the blue, he said, by the way, there's a spirit around you, somebody that you knew.
Wow.
It's a male, and he's protective. And that's all he said. But I was able to go back to, it took some of the fear away. So I went back into the room, and I looked around, and I realized that this room was where they stuffed all my grandfather's stuff, my dead grandfather's stuff, and he was a composer.
Wow.
So I talked to the air. I just said, okay, I know who you are now. I guess you're trying to get through to me, and I'll now be open to it if you would manage not to scare me like that. So find a way where I'm not going to get freaked out, and I'll listen to what you have to say. So that began a relationship which persists to this day. My grandfather, I didn't know him really. He died when I was 8, but I do remember his piano, and I have his piano right now, and a ring of his. And the contact with him is less now than when I was in more turbulent times, and he was a guide during that time. And he funneled music to me, and I knew he was doing it because I would be given a phrase of music, and I would, in the dream, and it wasn't a dream really, I was aware of the room around me, but my eyes were closed. I was given a phrase of music and made to repeat it over and over and over again, so I would have it memorized by the time I woke up. And sometimes they were accompanied by stories that then the song became about. And this led to a song cycle that never got recorded called Sleep Around Town, which was songs of puberty, all kids going through puberty. And that led me into the theater where they did an actual production of the songs.
This is blowing my mind right now. Well, I'm sorry, what was it like?
And I was told by this psychic when I went back to him and I said, it's my grandfather. He said, well, when he died, he was working on a piece that was kind of an odd length, like Kurt Weill's 7 Deadly Sins.
Right.
He said, like 45 minutes. And he wants you to write something like that. And that's what this song cycle was. It was about 45 minutes. With
family like your grandfather in other parts of your life? I mean, that is almost, well, it is completely supernatural, but totally real.
Oh, yeah. I finally did an entire blog about it in chapters. It's book length, and it's called At Home with a Ghost, which tells not just the whole story of my grandfather, but my continuing adventures with spirit and poltergeist and, the lower spirit world as well as the upper
wow.
over my life. It's not frequent, but there are stretches of time where there was quite intense contact.
Would you mind sharing? Could you share?
My grandfather.
Could you share a time when the lower world spirits, how you navigated them, and maybe how they actually maybe were helpful to you in some way?
Oh God, that's a long story. It's all in the blog, but in the short version is I lived in Morocco for a year, and I went with some Moroccan friends, some women who were going to kind of a witch in the country because they wanted some spells done. And I went along because, I'm a writer and I love a good story, but never for a minute did I believe it was going to actually lead to something that was going to torment me for the rest of my stay there. But basically, just to get the story, I laughed and told her that what I wanted was a genie, who would do whatever I want. And she said to my friends, she's much smarter than you are, because when she gets a genie, she's not going to need me. But I was put through a ritual, and I acquired a genie who, or they call it a jinn there, who then kind of faded back, and a whole lot of riffraff rushed in. So, I had to be given, incantations and little rituals, things to say to get rid of them whenever they would kind of wake me up. Or, I would have sensations like fingers digging in my ribs, that were very unpleasant, and very inconvenient. I was trying to write a book. So this went on, and I thought it would stop when I left Morocco after a year, and I went from Casablanca to Haiti, of all places, on a vacation.
Wow.
And the jinns, followed me, and I thought, this, I'm not going to continue this. So I sought out a Christian medium who was able to get rid of them on the spot. So I never had.
I'm curious. It's just funny that I was down in New Orleans a few years ago doing some rogue journalism with Bill Summers, who's an incredible ethnomusicologist and African percussionist, and also amazing cat. And he had a queen from the Queen of Zambia or some country in Africa, Queen Diambi there, and they performed this ritual, sort of a ceremony. There were several women there along with the queen, and they made it very clear to me, nothing, this is spiritual, this is just between us and the spirit, so no filming, no photography, this is just something is shared between us. And so, I was on my best behavior. I snapped a couple of still photos, didn't take any video. The next day, I am going around New Orleans, bopping around, going to see abstract music and this, that, and the other. And I'm taking a taxi home, and I get back to the hostel where I was staying, and my phone disappeared, gone, just gone in the ether. Nobody couldn't find it. Had to go buy a new one, and it was one of those lessons where it was like, hey, dude, man, you are just lucky. Just be lucky and grateful that you could experience that, and do not tempt fate and go and ever push the spirit realm, because it's real. And I just wonder if because you were so dogged about writing a book, trying to get this information out, do you feel like that was something you learned, like when you went to Morocco, was it clear to you after that some things are not meant to be shared with the world? I don't even know if the book was, but I don't know if the book, I'm sorry, I don't know if even the book had anything to do with that. You said you were looking for a good story, so you went to with these women to see this witch. And I don't know if your book was even going to be about that, but I just wonder, because it sounds like you, quote unquote, got cursed for a minute. And I just wonder if that was a lesson to you in recognizing that some things are not meant to be shared.
Well, I have shared it. As I said, it's on my blog. And at the time, I was not writing a book about that. It was just a story that interested me.
Totally. Oh, I get it. Yeah, I did. Totally,
switching to another song just so that maybe we won't have this problem anymore.
No, we're going to continue. It's not a problem either. It's very real.
Anyway, no, you encountered local spirits,
right.
Their own local rules, and in my opinion, those spirits are partly created and fueled by the belief of the inhabitants of that region, which is why, the ways of dealing with them are the local ways. And if you come in as a Westerner, you have to learn how to maneuver within that if you really want to, and sometimes the price.
Can you talk? I'd love you to. One of the L's on my show is love, and that comes in many forms. But I would like you to talk a little bit about your daughter. Does she recognize you as a conduit for magic? Where can you do? And I guess maybe I have two daughters of my own, and what I've realized over time is, they are my heartbeat, and they are my inspiration. But in some ways, I feel like respect is more important than love. And I just wanted you to talk about if you feel like your daughter understands your true, your abilities and your the ability for you to be a force of nature.
Well, she herself, as an adolescent, witnessed a few manifestations of my grandfather,
wow.
which scared the shit out of her. And he wasn't trying to be scary. It was just little things like doors opening and closing by themselves and stuff like that. Or light bulb shattering. Or blinking. So she witnessed that. And part of her, had to, was forced to accept it, and yet it was more important for her in the terms of growing up to attribute that all to the fact that her mother was a crackpot. So I let her do that. But later, when she was in college and needed some counseling, which she did not want from her mother, I sent her to an astrologer. And she's a great devotee now of astrology. But that's as far as it goes. I don't think she really questions why it is that astrology works. Because at that point, when you reach that understanding, you have to take into account that there are other dimensions in play.
So she no longer sees her wonderful mother as a crackpot, I would assume.
Well, she'll call me a freak, but
that's a good. It's fly your freak flag freely. That's the point,
She's not really able to do that. It'll be interesting to see how much further out she goes.
Right.
In her
Yeah.
life. But she wasn't privy to the same experiences that I had, and she doesn't want to read my blog. She kind of doesn't want to know about them. She doesn't want to get in any deeper. The way a lot of men react, by the way, when women talk about experiences like this.
Yeah, I think it's the most amazing. I have no problem with it. I think it's just absolutely the greatest thing in the world, operating at some sort of multidimensional level. But if you, no matter what, she's your bloodline, so she can ignore it all she wants, but it's going to keep popping up. And so I think...
I don't know. Some people are not receptive in that way. And I'm not as receptive as others, who actually are channelers and psychics and things like that. I don't have those abilities, though I would like to. So I'm able to live very well in the material plane, but I always keep in touch with the other, and it's manifesting even more now for two reasons. One is that I'm old, and everyone thinks about death a lot when they're in their 70s. And I'm one of the few people I know that's kind of excited to die. I don't really want to suffer isn't the dying part, but death itself, I think, is going to be very cool.
I want you to please talk about this excitement. What are you at least feeling? I don't want to say, I've learned not a long time ago, but I've learned never approach things with intention only and no expectations. So I hope that you're not going in with lots of expectations, but more instinct and intuition. What are you feeling excited about?
Well, it'd be nice to see some of the dead people again. I'd certainly like to see my grandfather.
Right. He's chomping at the bit,
Yeah, he may be the first person to meet me, which would be
Dude,
great.
he's going to meet you at the gate, man. I mean, he's there.
Yeah.
So reconnecting with you. Did you know your grandfather before he passed?
Not that much.
Interesting.
I mean, I was only a kid. You know, I was 8. We didn't see him that often. I have some impressionistic memories of him. I have a postcard from him that I found. I have his old, sheet music. He was a composer and a music publisher. I had not expected or even thought about him very much. I didn't expect to have any contact with him, or even I didn't know at first why. Why me? No idea. I really would like to meet him.
Sure, yeah.
And he left behind some things that did imply he too had quite a spiritual life. Prime evidence was that he was very high up in the Masonic. He was a Freemason.
Wow.
And used to compose music for their weird rituals. And I have photos of him in his weird satin gear and the hat and everything. Of course, you can't find out anything of what goes on in there, but I suspect it's of a spiritual nature by the evidence of the writings he left behind.
Did you, prior to doing your first documentary film, had you had an opportunity to go down into the South or places where there were tent revivals, Pentecostal church tent revivals?
I never had any thought of doing that, although I was interested in religion as not wanting to join any particular religion, but just interested in what people got out of it or what their beliefs were. So when my partner and I met Marjo in New York, we became fascinated with his story of being, he was kind of a hippie wannabe actor who earned money half of the year by going out and becoming a holy roller preacher. They had no idea that he had this other life. So we were sort of fascinated by that, and so we went with him to some of his revival meetings, kind of disguising ourselves as born-again Christians. And that was really where I saw up close the altered state that some people go into, and that really interested me.
Can you talk about because I just interviewed Edgar Winter last week, and him and Johnny, he was just like, dude, if you think rock and roll is high energy, and we were talking more about Pentecostal black tent revival. It was the idea. He just said there was he said things went on in there that were indescribable, didn't make any sense. It was the most euphoric thing you could ever. He goes, it makes rock and roll look incredibly small. And I would love you to talk about that. Maybe the first time you, not just like what was going, like the altered states, and ultimately, did you actually connect with that at some level as well over making the film?
I connected with it in the form of envy. We were there to do an expose because it was kind of appalling that, the obvious manipulation of the preachers to get money out of the congregation, often very poor congregations, and including a black church where we filmed, which was run by a white woman in a white nurse's uniform.
Get out of here.
wrapped around her finger. Oh, you should see the film. It still holds up.
I can't wait to see it. Wait, and sorry, what town was this in?
That one was Detroit.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow, that is mind-blowing.
But, people would go into trance and, it wasn't so much the speaking of tongues, it was them sort of giving themselves entirely to the music and whatever spirit they could feel in the place. And I felt there was something there and that they actually were getting their money's worth. Because, some of them led very proscribed and sometimes lives full of abuse. And this was one place where one way that you could get utterly free and let, God or spirit or whatever you want to call it, to be, what they call the infilling of the spirit.
Oh, man.
The infilling was something that, I really wanted. I just didn't want it to be the Christian God, and I had my acid trip by then. So I knew what that altered state was.
Right.
I'd never done it without drugs, and these people are definitely doing it without drugs. So, that impressed me too. At that point.
Can you talk? I mean, were there cats with like guitars up on? I mean, was the music sort of blues based?
Let's see.
I mean, the hymnal stuff is
in L.A. and Anaheim, which were two of the places we shot. It was more traditional, the Rock of Ages kind of,
right.
What a Friend Have We in Jesus kind of thing. It was just traditional and white. And down in Dallas-Fort Worth, where we shot another one, it was country, and in Detroit, it was black.
Can you talk about the black? That's the one, because that is the one that's the most authentic, And I just wonder what if you cats would get up and start playing dobros or guitars, like, because I mean part of it was like this idea of like you're playing the devil's music, but that was the whole part, is that's how you get the blues brings that spirit completely to life. And I got to tell you, I mean, the way that you just riffed on that, when I go see my friends on the road, my favorite bands, I'm in the front row, and it's like a Pentecostal tent revival for me. I'm accessing the spirits, and I'm bringing voltage to the bandstand. And that's all I care about. And I just think that is... Do you remember the name of the church in Detroit?
No. Sorry.
It's okay.
I don't remember the names of any of them.
So did you feel like...
all, I think, pretty much like Assembly of God places. But they were real holy roller places. They rocked out. That was part of their attraction. After sedate... there are sedate forms of Christianity, like Presbyterian and stuff like that, where it's not about the music, and it's very boring. But there's absolutely nothing boring about a Pentecostal meeting, and that's how they get people into the tent, and it's part of the enjoyment. Even Marjo, or the subject of our documentary, he was a fake, but he said, I really love the music.
Why do you so what, explain to Marjo, man, like, I'm just, maybe explain, I guess only in hindsight, you realized he was a fake? I can't imagine you doing this film if you thought he was a fraud.
Oh, no, he told us. I mean, of course he was a fraud. And, that was the whole thing about the film, was someone who was admitting it and then taking us out on the road and showing it to us.
Oh, my God.
Not just what he did, but what the other ministers did. That doesn't mean that all, evangelical ministers are, crooked at all. But we went to 4 different ones, and all 4 were the same. Even the one where we thought that he was genuine, we thought that was the one place where, the minister was on the level. He was arrested later for running stolen cars across the border into Mexico. So,
oh my God.
So basically, we couldn't find a straight one. But anyway, that was quite an adventure, and the movie made a huge splash. It was among the most publicized movies of the year that it came out, and it won the Oscar. So, and I was very young. I was like 24.
That is unbelievable. My God. I mean, wait, so I just want to be clear. Marjo's role was to take you to see other pastors manipulate the parishioners?
Yes.
How can I access this film, by the way? I mean, do you have any burned DVD we have to do set 2, and I have to watch the film before we do it.
Oh, no, you can stream it.
Is it on Netflix or something, or is it online?
I was able to acquire the rights after it went out of print in 2005, and a distributor immediately stepped up and put out the DVD of it, which you can acquire. But most everybody streams now, and it's available, on Apple and Amazon, all those places. It's done really well since it came out again, because in 2005, of course, we were in the Bush years, where 4 out of 10 people in America were said they were born again. Ugh. I mean, it had gone from this fringe thing when I made the movie to being enormous and very political, which was unimaginable back then.
I mean, what's amazing is that the Jimmy Carter, he won a majority of evangelicals in the late 70s. You're right. Yeah. It was very apolitical at that time. It's amazing.
Yeah. So when it came out in 2005, it had another relevance that it hadn't when it originally came out, where it played mostly in urban art houses. It didn't play in the hinterlands where, where the parishioners really were. But when it came out in 2005, it got a whole lot of views, and press all over again, and has really actually made money for me. It streams fairly constantly. I've had people license footage from it. Kings of Leon, the Black Keys.
My God! Listen to you. It's all coming back.
Because but some of them were raised in that, And to see the movie, they saw, another way of looking at it, And many of them were very, disgruntled, and had been scarred, in fact, by it. And by watching the movie, they can understand better what had happened to him and where the lies were.
Sarah Kernochan, can we do set 2? I mean, I just feel like we're just getting to pick up momentum, but I gotta dig deep on this doc before we do it.
Well, you might want to check my second doc, which was made 30 years later, if you want to see a channeler.
Of course. No, you absolutely, I mean, in the last 55 minutes, you've proven, that it's the end of hope and the beginning of truth, and you are truth. So it is really...
Maybe.
It's a high honor.
I may be a facilitator of truth. I don't know.
That's fine.
But anyway, this short movie is 45... It's about 40 minutes long. It's called Thoth, Thoth. It's on YouTube. And it also won an Oscar. I really urge you to see that, because Marjo's spiritual career was basically a lie. And this guy's spiritual career is all about the truth. Plus, he's incredibly entertaining. So watch them both.
It's good to connect with you, my friend. I hope you had a good time. I'll get this interview up later, and then we'll plan for set 2. And are you still in New York City, too?
I am at present, but I spend a lot of time in Martha's Vineyard now. I like to be around the ocean.
Well, I look forward to meeting you in person someday as well, my friend. And I send you a lot of good, warm blessing, and continue doing your part to inspire people to be themselves. Thank you so much.
Okay, and thanks for buying my record.
Oh, I love it so much. All right. I got to find the other one, too. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.